Welcome to the London Jesuit Centre. My name is John Moffat, and this is our podcast series for teachers to help you think around some of the big philosophical and theological ideas that come up in November, the month of the dead, and December, the month of Advent and Christmas. In this episode, I want to explore how the narrative of a judgment of the dead, which is part of sacred text, emerges in dialogue with philosophy and surrounding culture. Let us begin with a useful distinction between the judgment of the individual at death and the judgment at the end of time. The first is known in the later Christian tradition as particular judgment. St. John Henry Newman celebrates it in his famous poem The Dream of Gerontius. The second, for obvious reasons, is known as the last or universal judgment. The philosopher Plato wrote 400 years before the time of Jesus and has had a huge influence on religious and secular thought through the centuries. In some of his philosophical writings, he reworked the ancient myths about the afterlife to give an account of the journey of the virtuous soul. He makes a significant contribution to the images with which we think of the particular or personal judgment at the end of our lives. In his great work, The Republic, he offers an elaborate description of an ideal community in which everyone learns to live virtuously. He argues that such a life is ultimately a better life for the individuals who experience it. But then, at the end, he also affirms the religious idea that after death, the virtuous are rewarded and the wicked punished. So, in the last chapter, he presents an account of that last journey, reporting the near-death experience of the Armenian. In the old Greek myths of the underworld, semi-divine figures, the judges of the underworld, judge individual souls as they die. They sort out the dead souls into different groups, each according to their behaviour. Plato preserves this image. Some souls have been virtuous and go straight to a place of reward and delight, the Elysian fields. Some have been unforgivably wicked and are condemned to eternal punishment in Tartarus. Plato keeps those ideas, but adds a new one, that the souls will be reincarnated. After their time in the underworld, they will receive new bodies and return to the world above. So another new idea becomes important. Most people who die have sins from which they need to be purified. So they have to go through a series of ordeals until at last their soul is ready to pass into a life of ease before they eventually receive new bodies in a new incarnation. We can see how this widely read text not only offers a story for the fate of souls after death, but incidentally provides the basis for the idea of purgatory in the later Christian tradition. But Plato was not the only philosopher important to Jews and Christians. We've mentioned the Stoic philosophers a lot already. Members of this school of philosophy typically believed in one God and the afterlife, and had a big influence on the Jewish thought that fed into early Christianity. As you may remember from earlier episodes, Stoics believed that souls were material as well as spiritual, a mixture of the fiery and airy elements. So they told the story of what happened in death in a slightly different way to Plato, a way that actually makes bodily resurrection much easier to understand. The souls of the not-so-good might go down to the underworld, but the souls of great men, and yes, it was mostly great men, rise up to join the celestial beings and literally join the stars. They also made the connection between a sort of final judgment of individual humans and the end of the world. At the end of a cycle of time, when the stars have all returned to their original positions, the world dissolves in flames and everything starts all over again, with the souls returned to near identical mortal bodies in due course. The Jewish historian Josephus, who was writing at the end of the 1st century, claims that the Pharisees held beliefs similar to the Stoics, and he gives a few examples. It would not be surprising if the resemblance wasn't an accident, given that there were a lot of Greek-speaking Jews like Paul who were capable of engaging with popular ideas in the wider environment. Josephus takes as points of similarity the Pharisees' belief in the Spirit, in prophecy, and life after death. However, when it came to the end of the world, they seem to have thought that only the good souls would be given new resurrection bodies. The bad souls would be cast aside into the valley and burnt like rubbish in Gehenna. The Valley of Gehenna, by the way, is a real place and was a real rubbish dump just outside Jerusalem. When Jesus talks about the end time and judgment of the wicked to his disciples, this seems to be the picture that he uses, the burning rubbish heap. When we look at writings by other Jewish orders from around the time of Jesus, whose work doesn't make it into the official Old Testament, we get a picture of how the souls of the dead continue to fit into the universe. These authors build on the idea that souls belong in the fiery element. So they make use of contemporary astronomy, which pictured the Earth as at the centre of a series of concentric crystal spheres. They put their cosmic visions in the mouths of characters from the Tanakh, like Enoch and Elijah, who had been famously snatched up to heaven. These writings seem to mark an important development in Jewish spirituality and religious imagination, offering the reports and insights of someone who goes on a heavenly journey. This sort of writing leaves traces in the New Testament. Remember how Paul boasts to the Corinthians about spiritual experiences of his own, where he is taken up to the third heaven. Though the Book of Enoch didn't make it into the official Bible, Christian or Jewish, it was clearly influential enough at the time of the New Testament. It is quoted in the Book of Jude and has been preserved alongside the Bible in the Christian world in a number of different translations. The stories of the heavenly journey mingle contemporary science and biblical themes. They also help make sense of what happens to the souls that have died between now and the end of the world. In the Book of Enoch, the travellers reach one of the crystal spheres and find the souls of the dead waiting like bats sleeping in a cave until the time of bodily resurrection. We don't find that kind of detailed scientific cosmological speculation in the New Testament itself. Indeed, John's Gospel is critical of the idea of heavenly journeys and secret insider knowledge. For him, there is only one person who has come down from heaven to reveal the truth about everything, and that is the Son of the Father. However, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as well as the letters of Peter and Paul, all include descriptions of the end of the world, developed from the earlier template, the visions of Daniel. And one or two of those descriptions seem to borrow language from the Stoic description of the final conflagration of the universe. There are quite a lot of variations of detail in the New Testament, from Paul's laconic description in 1 Thessalonians to Jesus' speech over the Jerusalem temple and the elaborate account of the book of Revelation. But the main lines of the story seem to be these. There is a time of tribulation. The faithful are snatched up to heaven so that they don't have to face the turmoil. The sun and the stars are shaken from heaven. The elements dissolve in flames. The judgment of God takes place, at which the Son of Man presides, after which some pass into life, others into eternal perdition. Here we have the image of the burning rubbish heap. Then the dead receive new resurrection bodies, different somehow from the bodies they had before. The most detailed narrative of the end time in the New Testament is found in the book of Revelation. Like the book of Daniel, it consists of a series of visions speaking to Christian churches in a time of persecution. As in the book of Daniel, allegorical references to contemporary upheavals blend into projections of a planned series of disasters and plagues. These include unleashing forces hostile to God, but all as part of God's plan. The various phases of the disasters on earth are signalled dramatically by the breaking of the seal on a scroll of history or the trumpet of an angel presiding over a particular phase of destruction. These scenes of devastation below are contrasted with the glittering liturgies of worship in the heavenly courts, where the Lamb of sacrifice presides over the faithful ones. The action reaches a climax with a vision of the end of the world. The old heavens and earth pass away to be replaced by a new heavens and a new earth. In the midst of this, the heavenly Jerusalem descends as a living city in which all the just live in peace in the light of God. God's judgments within history blend into a single judgment at the end of history. God's judgment over nations blends in with the mythical judgment of each soul at the end of their lives. The book of Revelations turns those bare ideas into a vivid work of the imagination that deliberately echoes the language of the prophets and invokes familiar elements of Jewish Christian liturgy. Let's just think about this process that produces the Christian theology of the end time. We have a people who already believe in the faithful God of the covenant. They already have their sacred texts and believe God continues to speak through these. They believe that Jesus has been sent by God to rescue them. Under the inspiration of the Spirit, they find new reader meanings in these most ancient texts of the Tanakh. This allows them to develop a new explanatory narrative that speaks to their experience, their concerns, and their hopes. And that new narrative shows signs of an encounter with the philosophical narratives of other contemporary God-seekers. Out of this emerges a new sacred text, offering a way of interpreting the world for subsequent generations. We can also see, particularly in the book of Revelation, that the narrative of the end of the world and the last judgment never simply points to a remote future, entirely beyond the troubles and toils of the present moment. It connects that grace-filled future to how the world is now. This world is always coming to an end, always needing renewal by the grace of the God of the covenant, the God of justice. So what happens now, particularly in the representation of the liturgy of the faithful, is a real presence, a living sign of the realities that will only fully be revealed at the end of time. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.